because I'm smart. I'm here because I ask questions, and I try to do what is probably the hardest thing to do when we are young, which is to take a long-term perspective. And so I've been learning and sort of thinking a lot about the importance of taking a long-term perspective over a short-term perspective. I think so many things in our society ask us, what's happening in the next 5 minutes? What are you doing right now, right? Is that a question you guys answer on Twitter or on Facebook? What are you doing right now? That seems to be like a very common question these days. But the thing that really interests me is, what are we going to be doing, right? What is our life plan? What is our 10-year plan? What's going to be happening in the world in 2020? And those are the types of questions that I'd like to address us to a little bit this morning. I just want to provide a little bit of a framework for some of the ideas I've been thinking about with the economy, how it affects millennials, what we can do individually, what we can do collectively, and what is the future outlook. So does that sound like an okay time for the next 45 minutes or so? I'm definitely going to be taking a lot of questions, and I'll just, I don't know if we'll probably figure it out at the end if you guys want to come up here for the questions, or if you'll be passing around a mic.
Tell us what you want.
Okay. Okay, there'll be a mic, yes, and we'll just pass it around. So I wrote the book Generation Debt, and a few years ago, before too many people were really talking about debt, before debt actually kind of became this watchword that affected the whole economy, and people started asking these questions. What is the credit crunch, right? What was the housing bubble? What happened? How'd they get away with it? How did these guys manage to somehow convince everybody that these, mortgage-backed securities were actually money, or in his case, Mr. Madoff, that actually he was selling something that wasn't even a security at all? So what happened? How'd they get away with it? Did we just miss this? I mean, are we just on the skin of our teeth or on our fingernails missing something that people called the downturn that was, the biggest since the Great Depression, or possibly could have been the Great Depression if some people hadn't acted fast? And then the long-term question to me, which is, what kind of economy do we want when this is all over? Right, and I don't know if you ever saw that Simpsons episode where Lisa says, the Chinese characters for, crisis, it's danger plus opportunity, and so Homer says, Christ-opportunity, right? But the point being, obviously when the wheels stop, or when, things grind to a halt, you do have an opportunity there. There is a little bit of an opening to maybe look at what we've been doing and do things a little bit differently. So to go back a little bit, this is a handy-dandy cartoon explanation for what happened with the mortgage crisis. It might be a little bit small to read, but basically, right, housing prices went up. There was a huge amount of money that was flooded onto the market to lend to Americans. There were a lot of people around the world who wanted to lend money to Americans to buy mortgages because they saw mortgages as being a very safe investment, and everyone saw mortgages as being a very safe investment. The problem was there was so much of a trade in mortgages, they were being bought and resold so many times that they were no longer a safe investment because nobody was looking anymore at who they were lending the money to. And in Florida, I mean, more people in this room have been affected by this crisis than in almost any other state in the country, because Florida is one of those places that really experienced this massive run-up in housing prices, this disintegration of any normal lending standards or any normal, really rational thinking, because that's what a bubble is, right? A bubble is when people aren't making the same decisions on the same rational basis as they used to make. And of course, this led to a situation at the end where, really a sort of short-term insanity. It blew up in people's faces. Nobody was really expecting it. And there were a lot of different effects that led to this short-term insanity. People talk about the lack of regulation, too much credit, sovereign wealth funds, that means China and India, people making a lot of money wanting to invest it into the US market. But again, wanted to kind of turn to what are the long-term causes here. And the long-term cause for the run-up in debt in the US economy is really this idea that we have an economy that runs on consumer spending. And for the last 30 years or so, median income in the United States has been very stagnant. It has not been growing. And so consumer spending going up, income being flat, there's a very large growing gap, and that gap is being made up by debt. And so motivating the debt, the reason that people were able and willing to get into huge amounts of debt to buy houses was this stagnation in spending. That's sort of the stagnation in income. That's sort of the long-term cause. And so, this quote here being from Robert Reich, the U.S. Secretary of Labor, the idea that, the only lasting remedy to this situation is to increase middle-class buying power and not just temporarily. So how does this affect us, right? Who are we? Who are you? Who am I, right? Who are the millennials? The millennials are this generation that is very much described and usually maligned by being described. There's plenty of good things about us. We're a large, diverse, tolerant population of people. But for everything that people say good about us, there's something bad that people say about us as well, right? That we're lacking in respect, that we're lacking in long-term perspective, that we're lacking in probably education, that we're too obsessed with our, smartphones or our PS3s. And I think that, these stereotypes really contribute to a lot of the issues that affect us because as much as we are a workforce for the next generation, a lot of people think of us as being, really inadequate to these challenges. And I don't really buy that. I think that we are actually going to rise to the challenge because every generation rises to the challenge that we are presented with. The major sort of question that I took, or the perspective that I took that was different from a lot of people that talked about our generation, was that I looked at us as actually having serious concerns and problems. And a major concern and problem that we all share as a generation is the economic issues that we're inheriting. So, employment, college costs, college loan debt, very, very important issues that we all are facing as a generation. Doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter, what your technological experience is or your problems with, sex or drugs or gangs. We all have money issues. So looking at the generation that way really helps us sort out, we're living in this situation where it seems that it's very, very, very important for everyone to get a college degree. Would everybody in here agree that it seems important to get a college degree? Okay, we all know this, right? And you want to be like the guy on the left. You don't want to be like the lady on the right, right? There's a major, major, major gap between people who get a college degree and people who don't get a college degree. The problem is that it's not cheap, right? States across the country right now are cutting back on public education. When states cut back on public education, they immediately raise tuition. Raising tuition has become a major trend over the last 20 years. It's risen more than any other good or service over the last 20 years, more than any other good or service, college tuition. The way that we pay for that tuition has changed. Loans has become the largest single source by a long shot for college aid. Loans are really a way of life for this generation. So, it's again, to take a little bit of the long-term perspective, college loans have not been around that long. They've been around since the late 60s, early 70s. As recently as the early 1990s, which isn't that long ago, right? Like when Seinfeld was on, right? You guys remember Seinfeld, right? Yeah. Okay. 1993, less than half of all students were graduating with student loans. They were graduating with about $10,000 worth of student loans. So since 1993, now we have 2/3 of students graduating with loans. They're graduating with $20,000 of loans. This is something that is truly affecting the majority of this population again. And it's affecting our ability actually to maintain our first place rank in the world in terms of education. Because of the rising cost of education, because of the transition from grants to loans, you see this really nifty rising line, which is our educational attainment as a US population. That's the percentage of the population that has at least a high school degree or at least a college degree. You see this nifty rise in this line, and then you see it flattening out, right? Leveling off, no longer gaining. So America, which was for a very, very long time, hundreds of years, the most educated nation in the country, in the world, most educated nation in the world, is now 10th in the world. We're leveling off. I really see a connection between the rising price of education and the shift from grants to loans, and the fact that we're no longer the most educated nation in the world. And this has a very serious effect on us as a generation, has a very serious effect on individuals as well. What we've seen actually is a stagnation in income for young people. This graph shows young people's income of 25 to 34-year-olds. You've got men on the left, you've got women on the right. Do you see any of those lines heading upwards? There is a gain. That's sort of a trick question. You do see a gain in the income of women since the 70s, right? Since there's been much more opportunities open to women. But there's a very large gap, again, between the income of people who have a high school degree only, and then that top line of people who have a college degree or more. But that gap is growing because the income of people with less education is going down. The income of people with more education is not really going up. It's going up a little bit for women. It's pretty flat for men. This is, by the way, from 1972 to the mid-2000s. It's actually gotten a lot worse in the last decade. There's been a little bit of a nosedive in incomes for the young, and this is a recent report, that income for men especially, and we can talk about the reasons that this recession might have impacted men more than women, income for men is way down, income for women is also down. So, I'm sure you guys are all feeling super happy that you got up to spend time with me this morning. But let's look into some of the reasons, right, that this generation is facing these kinds of headwinds in the job market. And I'm not talking about this recession. I'm talking about a decade-long trend, right? One is that we change jobs a lot more quickly. Okay, you guys can all expect to take about 9 jobs in your first 10 years in the job market. Changing jobs is not inherently a bad thing, but what tends to happen is that in earlier generations, people took one job and they worked their way up, and you could expect a rise in income after being at a job for a few years. Now, if you're switching tracks all the time, it can be very difficult to actually make some gains and to grow in your career. There's been a really big change in the quality of jobs, even for college graduates. A lot of people are facing. How many of you guys know about internships, plan to do an internship, have done an internship? Okay, internships are great, right? They're a really great way to break into the job market, but many of them do not pay, right? And they are sort of a harbinger, a bell ringer for an overall change that's gone on in the job market, where there is more part-time work, there's more temporary work, there's more freelance work. All of these things can be great because they're a lot more flexible. Problem is that they don't always have benefits, they don't always have room for advancement, they don't always have healthcare, retirement, any kind of permanence. So, again, this is a change which comes with some trade-offs, but it's definitely a change that affects us all in our income, especially. Competition, obviously, is global, right? We're all facing the fact that there are, yes, 9 countries ahead of us in terms of educational attainment. There are countries like China and India and Brazil that have very large young populations that are all kind of excited to come here and maybe take jobs. Young people are the largest and fastest growing group in the country without health insurance. I don't see young people out there talking about health insurance. Somebody called me up from the radio a couple of weeks ago to say, what's the deal with young people and health insurance? They're the largest and fastest growing group without health insurance. Why aren't they there at the town hall meetings? Why aren't they there speaking up? I mean, I could think of some explanations. You guys could probably think of some explanations, but the fact remains that this is a debate that really affects us. Retirement is a really big question mark for us. We're not seeing jobs that have benefits. We're seeing possibly Social Security changes being made. We don't really know what's going to be out there. Many of us are just expecting to work probably our whole lives. So, looking at all these challenges that we face as a generation, the question kind of remains to me, like, what do we have to offer? What is our answer to this? And, I mean, there's surveys that show that, young people are more optimistic and we're looking for more opportunities in the job market, or we're changing our expectations. Optimism means something really personal to me because, I grew up in New Orleans. So my family was affected by Hurricane Katrina, not as badly as 95% of people in the city, but we lost things. My high school was messed up, homes of my friends. And I spent about 6 months down there after the storm, doing volunteer work, teaching in a school, and also writing about what was going on there. And what I really learned, I wrote this book, Generation Debt. They gave it the subtitle, Why Now is a Terrible Time to Be Young. I was a problem junkie. I was like a disaster junkie. I wanted to hear about global warming and how it was going to destroy the earth. And, I liked all those post-apocalyptic movies where people get together and, try to save the planet after the big thing hits the earth. And I really was into thinking about really big problems. And what I realized, so finally I'd actually seen one, right? New Orleans after the storm, very big problems. And here's what I realized. Pessimism is a luxury. Pessimism is something you do when you have what you need already. Pessimism, you can't afford to be pessimistic if you really think that there's problems out there. The only people that get things done when there's real problems are optimists. And it's not about, some kind of silly, like, happy face, daisy chain, everything's going to be great, Hannah Montana philosophy. It's like, it's really just about if you want to actually get something done, if you believe that these problems are real, then you have to be optimistic. And that's our greatest asset as a generation. Because I think young people are optimistic. They're genetically optimistic. You feel good when you wake up in the morning. You got some energy. You don't feel, like old people feel tired when they wake up in the morning. You guys don't feel that way. You feel good. So this is good. Given that may or may not be true, you guys may have different, maybe you feel very tired. Maybe you guys are working 2 jobs. Maybe you have to worry about your family all the time, or maybe you have other things in your mind. But I do think that optimism is a learned stance, and I think it's something you can really take with you to meet these challenges. So what can we do then as a generation? Well, first of all, I want to step back a little bit and talk a little bit about this whole idea of debt, right? We have a situation in the world where we have this huge growth in consumer debt. Consumer debt has doubled in the last 10 years. We also have a huge growth in the national debt, as the congressman mentioned. And we're running out of chart on this chart because this chart goes up to $9 trillion, but by the time we finish the stimulus package, it's actually going to be $11 trillion. That's the national debt. That's everybody's debt. That's what the nation owes as a nation. This is what individuals owe as individuals on their credit cards, on their mortgages, and on their student loans. So very, very large, very similar kind of large growth. This is a little bit of a wild card. This is about this is a chart showing the growth of greenhouse gases over a similar kind of time period. Very similar shape to this line, right? And the reason I throw this in there because I think that there's such a thing as ecological debt. I think there's such a thing as assets of the world that we're exploiting that we are going to eventually have to repay or pay back. And so I see a very similar pattern in these 3 things: national debt, personal debt, and the ecological debt that we're facing. And I see that there's this very similar outcome a lot of times, right, to a line like this. This is a biological graph, a very famous biological graph. It shows the population of reindeer on an island in Alaska. And they were introduced onto this island. They had no natural predators. They ate everything on the island. They got really big. They multiplied huge amounts. Then they crashed, right? So there's a little bit of a pattern here, right? I think that debt is not sustainable. Ecological debt is not sustainable. Personal debt is not sustainable. The national debt that we're incurring is not sustainable. Unsustainable is a very simple word. You hear the word sustainable a lot. Sustainable means stuff we can keep doing. Unsustainable means stuff we can't keep doing, right? So the question to ask now at this point, to put our energy toward and our optimism toward, is what would be sustainable? How do we have a sustainable economy? How do we have a sustainable planet, right? Are we on the right path right now for that kind of recovery? People are saying that we're a little bit out of the woods with this recession. What would be sustainable? We had a huge government bailout. We had a huge stimulus package. It seemed to help the big guys, right? It seemed to help the banks. It seemed to help AIG, it seemed to help GM. What about individuals? Well, it doesn't look so good right now. It looks like we're headed for something called a jobless recovery, which was coined in the early 2000s, in the last recession, when the economists noted that companies were recovering their profits, but they'd figured out a way to make workers work harder without paying them any more money. So it's in a continuation of this situation where people don't make any more money, and companies continue to make more money. I don't think that's sustainable. I see that as not really being sustainable. I certainly don't see it as being happy. I don't want to keep working for less and less money. That's just me. So what would be sustainable, right? We're headed on a path where we really have a choice to make. You know, it's not, the book hasn't been closed yet on the way that this recession is going to be responded to or what our economy is going to look like in a few years. So the question is, you know, a jobless recovery or a green economy? And when I say green, I don't just mean, you know, environmentalist, but I mean this definition. This is the UN Environment Program's definition. A green economy is an economy that values nature and people and creates decent, well-paying jobs. Or this is a definition that was published in the Harvard Business Review, smart growth. He wrote a smart growth manifesto. And basically he's saying smart growth is growth that's sustainable. It doesn't just happen on the top, but it happens all the way through a whole society. And it knits the society together instead of creating these huge divisions between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. So smart growth or green economy, it's something that you know, doesn't just happen. And I think we can all see that, you know, we sort of have all witnessed the effect of letting the economy just happen. What happens when there's a market that's not regulated, when there's not enough rules in the market, nobody's telling anybody what to do, and everyone's just doing what they feel like. That doesn't work so well. So I happen to be of the school of thought that believes that there's a legitimate role for government to play in creating a fair playing field, making sure that people are rewarded for their work. We're making sure that commodities in the economy like oil are priced at what they really cost. And so we're really paying the real cost of things, and we're not borrowing the money to pay for things that we really need, like healthcare and education, but things are in balance. And this is another visual way of representing that, just that the economy doesn't exist, you know, and that's the, you know, the material capital or the monetary capital sphere of the economy doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a human sphere and there's an environmental sphere. There's nothing that comes into the economy that doesn't come from people working and natural resources. There's no other source of wealth besides people's work and natural resources. So if you're not looking at the sources of wealth, then you're not really going to have a holistic, true growth that's shared both by nature and by people. So what can you guys do? What's the strategy? What's the winning strategy? I already told you thinking positively is a good way to go about things. What are the specific things that you can do as a generation to respond to the situation that we're in, to get us on the path to real recovery? Because really, you know, the economy is made up of people, right? So one thing that I really recommend, yeah, I took this picture at a party near my house, and I'm serious. And I love this picture because everybody smiles when they see this picture. This is a picture of someone who loves what they're doing. They love what they're doing, okay? They're doing it for no other reason except that they love it, okay? You cannot not smile when you see this person. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. Okay, all right. Hey. Listen, the economy is made up of individuals who are making choices to work, and if you don't work in line with your values, then the economy is not going to have values. People talk about, you know, Bernie Madoff is a monster, or, you know, these bankers are so greedy. If you have the responsibility to choose a career that's in line with your own values, and so that you can go to work every day and look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm doing something good for the world, I'm doing something good for my family, I'm doing something good for myself. That's your responsibility. If we have an economy where everybody says that somebody else can do something good and I'm just in it for myself and I'm just in it to make money, it's not going to work. we're gonna end up with what we have right now, okay? So in order for us to have an ethical economy, to have a fair economy, people need to be that way in their jobs. You need to be able to choose work that is rewarding to you personally and that's in line with your values. Another major reason to do that, I gotta say, is that if you choose a job just so you're gonna make money, recall that you're gonna be switching jobs very soon, right? You have a lot of instability. And if you don't choose a job that has intrinsic motivation for you, that you enjoy, then it's not gonna be very rewarding at all. That's really all we can have really to trust in, is that we're gonna enjoy our work. We're also gonna have to work really hard, right? Changing jobs a lot, you have to maintain your connections. You have to have a personal presence online, a personal portfolio, to where when people Google you, they don't see a picture of somebody in a fairy costume. They see your accomplishments, they see your connections. You have a public profile, you have a public presence already. You have an opportunity, unlike any other generation, to make connections, to use those connections, to make people into mentors, to write to people that you admire and ask them if you can ask them some questions, to interview people, to send people emails. There's so many opportunities out there that you have for the taking. To work hard, to love what you do, to save your money, right? The antidote to debt is savings. This generation is discovering this really quickly. The generation debt moniker that I helped us be branded with, I would like to lift that. I would like for that to go away. Student loans are becoming a way of life, but credit cards don't have to be a way of life. Credit card availability is going down. Private student loan availability is going down. The resumption of sanity in the credit markets is a really good thing for people. I know it might be annoying if you can't find a credit card or if the credit card limit's very low, but it's really actually a very good thing. This is a very simple, balanced money formula. Budgeting doesn't have to be complicated. Budgeting can be actually very simple. If you can save your money, then you don't need a budget. If you can put away 20% of your income, you don't really need to budget. That's how simple it is, okay? There's a lot of free online services out there. Mint.com is getting bigger every day. I think they got acquired recently. I talked to the owner of Mint. He's a pretty smart guy. This is a graph from Mint. Mint is a free service. You can put in your bank accounts, and it can track your money for you. It can help you stick to a budget. It can give you an alert before you go to the ATM if you're going to go over budget or if you have a fee or a penalty. So there's a lot of tools out there. There's tools unlike what any other generation has had. So then the question becomes, what can we as a generation do, right? What can we collectively do, right? I really believe that there is a role for government to play, as I said, in making sure there's a fair playing field, that we're on the path to real recovery. I believe it starts with investments in things like education, economy, and healthcare. There's a reason that we talk about these investments. Education, building human capital, right? Education making us a workforce that's equipped to compete. And this initiative, Obama has adopted the responsibility to double the numbers who graduate from college in the next 20 years, between now and 2025, which is a pretty impressive initiative. I think we can all hope that we're a part of that initiative, right? You guys all want to graduate from college, right? Healthcare, this, again, I can only emphasize a little bit more, is your issue. Young people are the largest and fastest growing group in the country without healthcare. Healthcare affects our job opportunities. It affects how competitive America is with other countries. It's something that you should be involved in. Whether you're someone who's concerned about the cost of healthcare, about taxes, and you're coming at it from a fiscal responsibility angle, or you're someone who's really concerned about the lack of healthcare to the poor, to children, to immigrants, or if you're just someone who wants to be able to get a job and not have to stay in a job you don't like because it has a healthcare plan, which a lot of people have to do, it's an issue you should get involved in. Sustainable growth. Sustainable growth on an energy point of view, right? This is this incredible opportunity that we have for innovation in this coming decades and century. Copenhagen in December, America and the world are going to decide on the next set of rules for limiting greenhouse gases, trying to avert this big, meteoroid, asteroid disaster of global warming that's headed for the planet. individuals have opportunities in the sciences, they have opportunities in green jobs, opportunities in, if you want to work in construction, you can start a home retrofitting business. This is an image that I worked on an article about the power of locally produced energy. Here in Florida, in Gainesville, Florida, they have one of the most forward-looking policies in the country to produce locally produced solar energy. And there's all kinds of advantages to that. I can talk about the pros and cons. This is another one of my sort of pet topics. But the point being that huge opportunities in the new energy economy, huge opportunities to change, to innovate, to grow, and to have a sustainable future. So, I just want to leave you with this, that the economy is something we all participate in. It's not something that's far away or mysterious. It only consists of natural resources and human resources. There aren't any other inputs into the economy other than people's work and stuff from the planet. And so, if we do a little bit of thinking about what we want the economy to be for, what we want it to do, if we realize that it all belongs to us, and that we are going to be optimistic because we can't really be any other way, if we really think that, we are facing this challenge, that we're up to this challenge, we have to be optimistic, then, I think our choice is clear. I think, your choices as an individual are clear, what you need to do, and your choices as collectively as a generation, what we need to do, hopefully are going to be pretty clear. So that's what I got to say. Thank you very much.
Obviously, over the last 25 years, the national debt's pretty much been going up. I mean, there was a little bit of a blip in the late 90s when we had a surplus, but basically, for a long while now, the national debt has been going straight up. And I'm just wondering, as far as, from an economic perspective, how do you see us approaching this issue as far as taxation, as far as cuts? How do we cut and tax without hurting the economy, but if we don't do anything, we still hurt the economy? Where do we draw that line, and how do we do it?
It's one of these questions that makes me really glad I'm not a politician, because it's pretty much, it's something where we have to kind of go down stepwise. It's like, we ran up to the top of this really tall cliff, and you can't necessarily run down a cliff. You have to be very careful when you're picking your way down a cliff, right? So the most recent economic stimulus package, a lot of economists basically gave the president a free pass and said, we've got to stimulate our way out of this economy. We know that we're going to grow the deficit, but we don't have any choice at this moment. I think that's probably true, but I think in the long run, there's going to be extremely difficult choices to be made. One major looming issue is the entitlements issue, right? Social Security and Medicare. Major contributors to the deficit, major contributors to the national debt. Bringing them back into solvency involves cutting costs on healthcare, which continue to grow, and in Social Security, it's both raising taxes and cutting benefits. All of these things are going to be very controversial. The healthcare battle that we're going through right now is really step one in multiple rounds of major political battles where people are pitting your grandmother against your grandchild, and baby whales against children, and all these different things where people say that we can't have both. But I think that we can. We just have to keep our eye on the ball. Like, it's always going to be a matter of compromises. It's going to be a multiple decades process. And if we all can sort of try to agree that we have common interests, like not only having a smaller deficit and a smaller debt, but also having health care for people and also having some retirement security, I think we're going to be able to evolve our way to compromise. It's not going to be very quick, though.
Good morning. My question is, considering President Obama's goal to double the number of bachelor's degrees by 2025, how is that going to impact that degree in the marketplace? Are we going to have more of a need for a master's degree, and how are students supposed to be able to fund that?
This is a really, really interesting question. My next book that I'm writing is about the future of higher education, and I'm not sure that we're going to really actually necessarily meet that target, but I think that it's very important to have it as a target, and I don't think bachelor's degrees necessarily is going to be the be-all and end-all. I mean, the issue that we have here in the United States is not necessarily the number of bachelor's degrees, but the number of certificates and two-year degrees that we really have fallen behind on. There are many, many countries that have achieved this 55% line of people that have at least a one-year degree. And those degrees have been proven to raise people's earning power. It's not necessarily about moving the goalposts farther down the field and making so you're competing with twice as many bachelor's degree recipients, but it's about expanding that idea of what you think a bachelor's degree or what you think a college degree really is supposed to be. Now, the question of how we're going to pay for it is a really, really huge question. I think there's a lot that can be done with technology. And I was talking with Representative Frey just before this about how you might, you're webcasting this whole event, and technology can save a lot of money. It can't create, resources out of thin air, but it can do a lot to moderate the costs.
Good morning.
Morning.
I really feel like a cultural norm in Americans has been both spending beyond our means and also not feeling like we are responsible for our debt, national eco debt, anything like that. Do you feel like our next direction should be either towards taxation or less spending on consumers?
Well, taxation is not an expression necessarily of a cultural norm. It can be an outgrowth of a cultural norm, but I think that, here in America, we're a lot more amenable to this idea of making individual decisions, right, about how we spend our own money. I think that it's very important in this generation that we start thinking a little bit more carefully about the consequences of our spending, right? And that doesn't just have to mean not getting the things that you need, but it has to mean every time that you buy something, you take on a responsibility, right? You are taking on the cost of ownership, of storage, of maintenance, just the burden of sort of feeling like, you have one more thing in this world that you have to think about and lug around. And not to mention now we talk about the carbon footprint, we talk about, is it fair trade? Was it produced under ethical circumstances, or was it made by children in China? We really have to think about the whole picture, the human factor and the environmental factor behind everything that we buy. And the more they become conscious consumers, I think that you can have just as much pride and just as much enjoyment of material things, because this is a very rich country, and we have, it's okay to want nice things, but the real question is, am I owning the appropriate amount of things? Do the things that I own really give me pleasure, or are they just keeping up with the Joneses? And do the things that I own, were they made under circumstances that I would endorse? If I had to go there and see it being made, would I say, this is something I want to be a part of? So the more that we start to ask those questions, I think the more conscious consumerism really becomes a way of life.
Hi.
Hi.
Before you said that the companies were getting more income as opposed to individuals who weren't getting as much. So how would you exactly persuade these companies to change their initiative and, I guess, let the wealth flow out more?
Well, this is kind of a controversial thing, but we used to have a big middle class in this country because we had a labor movement. We had workers that got together and sometimes fought in the streets, but definitely marched in the streets for a larger proportion of people's, of the profits of the companies that they work for. That was their banner, right? They said, we want an 8-hour day, we want a living wage, we don't want all the money to go to the heads of the companies. The labor movement in the United States today is a fraction, it's a pale, pale imitation of what it was back then. Many more people in the economy today think of themselves as professionals. They don't think of themselves as frontline workers or the type of worker that, is going to actually get out there and, fight for their own profits. That's something that people doesn't really enter their minds, because they think, oh, well, I'm going to be the boss one day, so I don't have to do that. But I don't think it happens through legislation, in other words. I don't think there's a limited amount that the government can actually do to force companies to do the right thing, or to force them to pay or not pay. That's un-American, right? That's not capitalism. If you have the government dictating what people can pay. Yes, you have a minimum wage law, but the real balance of power shifts when workers are a force in the conflict between workers, between capital and resources, to try to get their own fair share of resources. I think that's how it ultimately works. Maybe there's a new kind of labor movement. Maybe there's a different way for workers to organize. Maybe people do it over the internet, but I don't see it happening without collective power. I think we have one more. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. Let's give her an incredible round.